Today we're going to do an introduction to understanding what it actually means to believe and how faith and truth, how they all are integrated, not only in a religious context, but even in a secular and a scientific context. And so this is kind of like the flow of the class. We're going to go into the cosmological argument, and the teleological argument. Next week, the moral and DNA argument. So there's kind of like three rungs to this class. In the first portion of the class, we're going to examine the evidence for the existence of God. And so once we examine the evidence for the existence of God, then we're going to examine the reasons that you can believe the Bible is the revealed Word of God. And then we're going to get into the different reasons. And then we're going to get into the reasons to believe in Jesus Christ as the Messiah, as foretold in the Scriptures, and who in his nature as revealed in Scripture, and why you can believe that and trust that. So we're going to examine the evidence to believe. Now, before we do that, first we need to understand what is the foundations of faith. So if you think about what you believe, ask yourself the question, why do you believe what you believe? And usually, I'm a skeptic, and so being a skeptic, when I was confronted with those issues, I couldn't answer the question, and so I had like a crisis, like why do I believe? Like I was born and raised in the Armenian Orthodox Church, and being born and raised in the Armenian Orthodox Church really didn't like study the Bible or study the evidence of the Bible. We might have read the stories and things, but if someone were to say to me, well, why do you believe this? And in fact, that actually happened. Someone handed me a Bible. Some Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door one day, and they handed me a Bible and asked me to explain why I believe what I believe, and I couldn't. And I can remember that just like yesterday. I remember just going through the pages here, handing it back, slammed the door. I actually, inside myself, I was embarrassed because, like, why do I believe? And I remember saying, like, spouting off doctrine, Jesus is God. And then they said, oh, okay, now here's the Bible. Show me why. And I couldn't. And so I remember going to the priest, and I asked the priest, they go, why do we believe Jesus is God? And his answer was, it's our tradition. I'm thinking, wow, that's not good enough answer for me. Like, like tradition, everybody has traditions. And I remember like going on this, like trying to find out. And then I was like, well, why should I even believe the Bible? And so what evidence do I have the Bible's true? And I just remember like really questioning who I am, where I'm going, what's my existence, what if I die, where I'm going to go. And I would basically go, I had an office downtown Cleveland in the old arcade. There's some chairs, right? So I had this office in downtown Cleveland, and then I would go to the Cleveland Public Library, and I would wander the shelves of the Cleveland Public Library, and I would say to myself, just like yesterday, it's over 30 years ago, but I can remember it like yesterday, I remember saying to myself, if I could just read all the books on the shelf, I would know why I'm here. I would know the meaning of life. And it wasn't too long after that I pulled a commentary on the book of Daniel. And I started reading through this commentary on the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel, if you don't know, was written 2,500 years ago. And it talks about Babylonian history, Assyrian history. And I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. But I got to the 9th chapter. In the 9th chapter of the book of Daniel, there's a prophecy that gives the exact month, year, and day that Jesus is going to be killed and what's going to happen after he's killed. And it was written 539 years before he was born. I said, that's it. I have my evidence. And I remember my life changed at that point because I had solid evidence and I knew why I believed what I believed. And so that's the thing. Like when we're going through this class, ask yourself the question, if someone were to ask you, why do you believe what you believe? Can you answer that question? So you ask yourself, what are your beliefs based upon? Now think about it. Like, why was I going to a church? Because it was my family traditions. The Armenians have been Christians from 300 AD. So now 1,700 years later, it's tradition. And a lot of things can shape what we believe. For example, I can remember being in the 8th grade and seeing a video in the 8th grade and thinking, wow, I can't tell you exactly what the video was, but I remember watching a video that impacted my thought process and could change the way I believe, because I believe I saw that. It could be, you can go to college. Like, you can be confident in what you believe, and all of a sudden you go to college and you have a professor who presents something different to you that contradicts what you believe, and so your belief system can change. So we start asking ourselves the question, who am I? Like, how did I get here? Where am I? What we're talking about is, like, everybody has a foundation for why they believe. And a lot of people have never really examined that foundation. So they ask themselves the question, why do you believe? So you ask yourself that question, why do you believe what you believe? So if you look at the handout, we're going to go into that next week, actually, more into the handout. But naturalism and God. What is naturalism? Naturalism is the philosophical, and its core, it's a worldview that maintains that nature is all that exists, and therefore there is no supernatural realm or divine being like God. And kind of a breakdown real quick, one is the denial of God, and naturalism explicitly excludes the existence of a personal, transcendent God, along with other supernatural entities like angels or spirits. So naturalism is diametrically opposed to theism, which believes that there is a God and that he's the cause of the universe we're in. And naturalism uses science as the primary method for understanding, and naturalists typically view the scientific method as the most reliable way to gain knowledge about reality, emphasizing observation, experimentation, evidence-based reasoning. So we're going to look into that and compare that to different belief systems today. So let's just go through an example. A guy named Joe Atheist, okay? So Joe Atheist, he might have went to church, and he might have grew up in the church, and then he's now an atheist, kind of like we're looking at it. So you say, well, Joe, how did you come about your belief system? Joe might respond, he goes, I went to church my whole life, and then I went to college, and in college they taught me God doesn't exist, and that evolution and the singularity or the Big Bang was the cause of matter and how it formed. And what I believe is that I'm just matter, and I formed accidentally, and that through the process of evolution, I am here. I became a living being, but when I die, that's it. I die, and my body decays, and that's it. I'm over. Compared to, say, John Christian, okay, who could have went through the same experience, but he says, I believe in God, that God created me. I'm made in his image. I'm destined for heaven, kind of like Dustin and Stephanie in that video. And so we ask ourselves the question, and I was kind of like wanted to examine, Dustin's view. Oh, Dustin, how did you get your view? And you can see even through that questioning, his view wasn't really had a solid foundation of like, well, why do you believe the Bible? But he believed versus Stephanie, who basically was from an irreligious background. That was her family culture, and she didn't believe. So we can all look at our own lives, and you can examine your own lives and say, well, why do you believe what you believed, and do you have the evidence for what you believed? And that's the question. Why do you believe? So there's a foundation of faith, and if you examine that foundation of faith, if you like, for each individual, you can examine that foundation of faith, and there's reasons. So if we look at Joe Atheist, his foundation of faith is transitioned from, in college, I learned the truth about the world. So that was presented to him. This is the truth, and he believed that is true, what he learned in college. Whereas John Christian could have went through the same circumstances, okay, but he had a foundation of why he believed. God could have answered a prayer in his life, and that gave him evidence to believe. Like, I know God is real because I prayed and my life changed. So there's different levels of evidence. For me, I needed empirical data. I needed more like solid evidence, not like emotional based, not like experience based. And so that's where God answered my prayer when I went and I pulled that book, that book from the library shelf, and I was able to see the evidence. And now I present that evidence to people. So why is there a difference? Because there's points in our life that we make a choice. Eventually, everybody makes a choice why they believe what they believe. Either that choice could be, I don't care, I'm just going to live my life, it doesn't really matter. That, in a sense, is a choice. So let me stop there, see if anybody has any questions or comments. The question is, why do you believe, though? Why do you believe the Bible? That's the purpose of this class, because we are going to get into the solid evidence on why you can believe in the existence of God, and why you could believe the Bible is true, and why you could believe Jesus Christ. So, logia, points of reason. So, here's the question, though. So, Joe Atheist and John Christian both have diametrically opposed views on the existence of God. Can they both be right? No. It's called the law of non-contradiction, okay? Because their views contradict each other. The law of non-contradiction, and it's a law that all of us operate under, because without operating it under, there'd be mass confusion. But we'll get into that more in a second. I'm going to show you a short video in a second here. But Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, he brought this point out, like that there's two contradictory positions cannot be true at the same time, because therefore you have A is A and B is B, but A is not B, because they both can't exist at the same time, because their existence would contradict each other. So that's where, like, what the words, when someone says truth, what is truth? Truth, by its very nature, claims to be true as opposed to a lie. A lie is the opposite of truth. A lie and a truth can't be both correct, because they contradict. Aquinas, he was a Catholic philosopher who kind of like brought Aristotelian philosophy and the logic into a biblical perspective in the, I think, 13th century. But the law of non-contradiction is basically saying, like, God can't exist and God can exist and cannot exist at the same time. Either God exists or God doesn't exist. And I'll give you an example with Islam. So, for example, the reason Islam and Christianity both can't be true is because Islam and Christianity have contradictory beliefs. Islam, for example, believes Jesus did not die on the cross. Christianity believes Jesus did die on the cross. Islam believes Jesus is not the Son of God. Christianity believes he is the Son of God. So they just can't both be true. They're both non-contradictory. It's two contradictory beliefs. So that's why it's important to understand that concept, because a lot of times people will say, well, all religions are true. Let's look in nature of truth, another example of the nature of truth, okay? Why is something true? Okay, so let's look at an example, okay? Does believing something create reality? So if you believe really hard about something, does that make it true? No. I love using the Eiffel Tower example, okay? I believe I can fly. I believe in all my heart that I can fly. Is there a way I can test my hypothesis that I can fly? Yeah. I go to the top of the Eiffel Tower, and you could bring a pigeon next to me, and we could both jump off the top of the Eiffel Tower, okay? So as I fall, okay, and I hit the ground, now you have evidence that I can't fly, whereas the pigeon is going to fly. So my belief versus reality. So that's kind of like what's going on in the world. It's like everybody has a belief system, but everybody can't be right. And what we do, how we believe, kind of shapes our reality. So just in those interviews, those are just a couple of interviews. I have more than that, but truth corresponds to reality. That's what truth is. What is real? And so one of the main questions about truth is, well, how did the universe come about? In fact, we're going to talk more about that next week in the cosmological argument, but there's implications, because they used to believe that there was a static universe, that the universe always existed, okay? Well, the question is how did the universe come about? And facts is that the universe is here. These are facts. The universe is here, and we're part of it. Universe meaning the whole universe, okay? So that is truth. The universe is here, and we're part of it. Even to hear that question is the affirmation that you're part of it. So the nature of truth. So Joe Atheist believes his college classroom experience proved God does not exist. So here's Joe Atheist. He's from a church, for example. He might gone to church. He might even believe that there might be a God, but then he goes to his classroom, and in his classroom, they're showing you how the universe exploded into existence out of nothing, and then how the particles from this explosion, the singularity or the Big Bang, exploded, and then they coagulated into galaxies, and they coagulated into solar systems, and how our planet came to be. Now, there's no video of this, okay? This is just science speculation. And then the right chemicals, the right positioning of our planet that's going around the sun, that chemicals, the amino acids formed, and the right things happened, then boom, you had your very first cell. And then that very first cell knew it needed to replicate itself, and it became another cell, and then it started replicating itself, then it added information. Eventually, boom, I'm here. I, Joe Atheist, I believe that because I saw that. So, but what's really the basis of Joe Atheist's belief system? It's his experience, his college classroom experience. To him, proved God does not exist. His beliefs, he believes his belief corresponds to reality, okay? He believes it's true as opposed to being false. That's why he's asking, can an atheist have a belief system? Can an atheist be religious, okay? Because in essence, we're going to talk more about that next week, but the question is, God does exist or God does not exist. There's only one truth. Now, there's a group known as agnosticism, agnosis, meaning I don't know, okay, like Stephanie. Stephanie says, I asked her, she's agnostic. Yeah, I'm an agnostic. I said, I don't know. So that's kind of like in the waiting room. So if you think of the two doors in the waiting room, so the two doors are, it's like an atheist will say, I believe God does not exist. I've come to the conclusion God does not exist. Where I say God does exist. So I go through that door. But there's people in the waiting room saying, well, I don't know. I don't know. God could exist. God could not exist. I don't know. I need evidence. I need something to prove. And I do believe that people, and I have friends who were atheists who are now believers because they didn't know the evidence. And so when you have the evidence, you're able to present that evidence for people. In fact, there's a very well-known scientist who was an atheist, and through science, he saw there's a cause for the start of the universe, and as he studied more and more, he came to the conclusion that Christianity is the truth. But he started out first being an atheist, then he realized, well, God has to exist. Well, who is the God that exists? How am I to know the God? And then he came to the conclusion through research and through evidence that Christianity is the truth. But we'll get more into that later. So everybody here has a worldview. So what that means is that you wake up in the morning and you have a perspective on the world you're living in. So if you were a Muslim, you would have a perspective. If you were a Buddhist, if you were an atheist, you have a perspective. If you're a Christian, you have a perspective. You're seeing the different events. You have a view about that. So, and the questions that go along with that view is, where did I come from? Ask yourself the question. If someone were to ask you, where did you come from? Where did I come from? What would you answer? Other than saying, well, I came from my parents. Well, where did your parents come from? Well, they evolved. Where did they come? Eventually you get down to was there a God? So where did I come from? And so, but this shapes our worldview because it also shapes our worldview. It says, well, where am I going? If I died today, what would happen to me? Where am I going? And I'm not good at German. Okay, so Weltanschauung. Okay, that's the word. The word worldview comes from that German word Weltanschauung, which means a comprehensive conception of or apprehension of the world, especially from a specific standpoint. So we all have a worldview. Let me stop there, see if anybody has any questions or comments. The question is faith a product of the environment? But environment including evidence, so we all have faith, but what's the basis of your faith? I could say that my faith is based upon the evidence in the Bible and the things in the Bible and the things outside of the Bible that prove and validate the Bible. For example, Daniel actually lived outside of the Bible. Like he's not just in the Bible. We can actually go to the city of Babylon. You can actually go to the city in Iran today. There's a city called Susa, where it was the last location where Daniel was, and there's the tomb of Daniel in Susa. You can go and see the tomb of Daniel, and we have archaeological evidence behind Daniel. We have the written cuneiform documents that attest to the things that Daniel's talking about. So we're going to get more into that in the coming weeks, but there's evidence outside of the Bible. So my faith in the God of the Bible is not just in, I believe this book called the Bible, but I have evidence that affirms that the Bible is in fact what it says it is. Okay? So, but everybody has a worldview. Like, so the Buddhist worldview, like the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, okay, that he is the enlightened one, that he's the one who has truth. The Buddhist wakes up and he thinks, I'm suffering, but suffering's part of this illusion of life, and therefore I'm going to keep suffering, and I'm going to go through, and I'm going to be incarnated and escape into the nothingness. Well, that's what Buddhism believes, that they're going to. The goal of life is to escape into nothing, to go through this karma. The Muslim worldview is that the Allah who has revealed himself to Muhammad, that it's going to be a world that's going to be united under Islam and so forth. And there's the atheist worldview that we're just here by accident. So what happens to me? Hey, I die. Nothing happens to me after I die. I cease to exist. I'm just here. I won the lottery. That's how it came. And another corollary of the atheistic worldview is nihilism, which nihilism means that there's no meaning to anything. There's like, if you're just like a leaf falling from the tree. There's absolutely no purpose, no meaning to anything you do or you say, because it's just a false perception of importance. And then there's a theistic worldview that there's a God who created the universe. I'm part of that creation, and there's different corollaries. Like Owen asked a question about Catholicism versus Islam. Islam is a theistic worldview. Christianity is a theistic worldview. So a lot of things fall under a theistic worldview. But the important thing is that understanding worldviews does not mean agreement. I study Islam, and I study atheism, and I study theism, and I study Buddhism, okay? That doesn't mean I agree with them. I study so I can understand the positions of the people who hold those views. So let's examine faith, and I'm going to use a Starbucks example of faith, okay? So I talk to atheists a lot, and I talk to everybody a lot. I like meeting people, talk to people, ask them what they believe. So, and a lot of times when I meet atheists are under the assumption that they don't have faith, that they're like faithless. And I say, well, everybody has faith. And I just use a simple example of Starbucks, okay? So the next time you go to Starbucks, ask yourself this question while you're standing in line, okay? Why do you believe this cup of coffee is not poisoned? You're standing in line, you're going to order a cup of coffee. Why do you believe it's not poisoned? What's the logic that makes you think that cup of coffee is not poisoned? Well, one, I'm just going to give an example of how faith works, okay? It's going to be based upon past experience. I've gone to many Starbucks. I've never had any bad poisoning reactions. So there's one item of faith, okay? I'm standing in line. The people in front of me, they're getting their cup of coffee. I don't see anybody falling and collapsing on the ground. If I was standing in line and someone fell and collapsed on the ground and started like this, hey, wait. Let me question this cup I'm going to buy, okay? It's also based upon the reputation of the company and their products. That's the purpose behind a name brand, is because when you buy a product that has a name brand, that name brand is a test to the validity of that product. And so you put faith in all the other products they're selling because it's a good name brand. So those 3 points is like why you would put faith in a Starbucks cup of coffee. So your mind is immediately reacting to the evidence already in it. So your mind makes an immediate judgment and a belief that the coffee is trustworthy and you can drink it. You have faith, and having faith is not bad, it's just reality. And I'll give you an example. I was just watching a video the other day about one of the issues that's happening in the United States is feral hogs, okay? And so which are wild hogs. So what they need to do is they need to capture the feral hogs and eliminate them. So they have different sets of traps, but feral hogs are very intelligent. So they have to set these traps, and they have to allow the hogs to eat out of these traps for many days, so the hogs have faith that it's safe to eat. And the problem is that if they set the trap too early and the hogs escape, then they communicate with the other hogs not to go and eat the food from these feral traps. So the hogs lose faith in the trustworthiness of eating the food. So even animals operate under the same principle of faith, whether like they trust that contraption. Okay. So the word faith itself comes from the French fiede or foi, and the Latin fides, meaning trust, faith, and confidence. So, for example, that student goes to the classroom, and then now I'm an atheist. He's put faith in the teachings of the professor, the teachings of the university, and that also works along the same lines as Starbucks, because that student's going to say, well, this is Harvard University, or this is Cleveland State, or and this professor has all these degrees, he has all these. Who am I, Joe nothing, to say that I'm right and he's wrong when he has all these credentials? And that's where a lot of times students acquiesce to think. But let's look at another example, okay? We all have faith. Think about the next time you drive over a bridge, okay? You have faith that bridge is going to carry you across it, right? But do bridges ever fail? Yeah, okay. But you have trust that the bridge is going to support you, it will not break, and we don't even think about it. We just drive over bridges. But at one point in our life, okay, we put our faith in the product. I'll give you an example. When Andrew Carnegie was making steel, because he was one of the innovators of steel as opposed to just iron, and so he started building bridges over huge areas made out of steel. But the problem is people didn't trust that bridge could actually carry them. So Andrew Carnegie had elephants walk over these steel bridges, because it was well known that elephants wouldn't go over something that they didn't trust. So when these elephants crossed over on his steel bridge, people knew that, hey, we could put our faith in these bridges, that it wouldn't collapse. So it's learning to put your faith in. So like, for example, go in an airplane. Why do you put your faith that airplane is going to take you from destination A to destination B? It's going to take you thousands of miles. You're going to go 30,000 feet in the air, and you're going to arrive at destination B. Why is that? Because again, you can break down that faith elements. You can, like someone, for example, who's afraid of airplanes could study the science behind airplanes, the science behind the wings, how the wings work, how all this comes about. And then, again, they can say, well, me, for example, I say, well, mathematically speaking, all the flights that are taking place compared to car driving, what's my odds of this plane crashing? So I say, okay, now I can trust that I'm not going to be in that one plane that crashed, because it's going to be infinitely small potential. So now I can put my faith in going into that airplane. We operate in the same way. So in the same way, let's look at truth and evidence. So let's say, for example, okay, truth and evidence are linked. I'm just using a silly example here. Let's say I told you I found 500 gold coins in my backyard that are worth $10 million. Who here would believe me? Okay. So what could I do to make you believe me? Okay. What kind of evidence could I show? Bring in the coins. Okay. So I can take the coins. I say, here's a bag of 500 gold coins. I found these in my backyard. And you're like, they're worth $10 million. Sure. So then you say, yeah, sure. Okay. So then I'm going to show you a video now. Here's me like walking in my backyard. And, whoop, oh, look, gold coins. Okay. And you go, what? He's going to say, sure. Okay. I'm going to, an assayer. Okay. Like they can weigh it. Oh, yeah, this is really gold. So what am I doing? I'm gathering the evidence to validate my claim, to show you that you can trust what I'm saying, okay? So I can show you evidence. So, and this is what a court does. You know, a lawyer is basically presenting a case, and he's presenting the evidence to validate the case, to prove the claim. Okay, whether the accuser or the defendant. In the same way, this is in the spiritual realms what takes place. So, for example, Jesus in John 20 verses 24 to 29, Jesus, after he's resurrected, Thomas hears that Thomas was gone. I think he went to get coffee or something like this, okay? So Thomas was gone, and they told Thomas that the Lord had come. He is, and Thomas' response, okay, called one of the twins, and it says, now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see in his hands the marks of the nails, and place my finger in the marks of the nails, and place my hand in the wounds, I will never believe. Okay? I will never believe. And then Jesus appears to Thomas, and he says, here, Thomas, here, touch. Here's the wounds. Put your hands in the wounds. And he goes, have you believed because you've seen? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed. So what was happening? There was a evidential experience going on. Thomas needed evidence to substantiate his faith. And then Thomas says, my Lord and my God. So I was kind of like Thomas. I doubted the Bible. I doubted the Bible. I doubted the existence of God. I questioned it because it's like, if this is just a book, why should I believe it? And then God provided me the evidence. And once I had the evidence, I was like, I'm going to shout it from the housetops. I'm going to let everybody know. I'm going to make YouTube videos. I'm going to do whatever I can do to tell people. So but we see this throughout Scripture. We see this even with Moses. Moses goes before Pharaoh, and he's presenting the case. It says, Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. So here's the Lord appears to Moses. He's telling Moses to go to Pharaoh, to go to his people, to proclaim his message. But Moses has questions. Well, why are they going to believe me, Moses? Okay. Then the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand, and he caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. And then, that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. God was saying, here is the evidence that you are to present to your people that I sent you. So God works from evidence. Even in the last chapter of John, God says that there's more evidence than this, but this is presented that you might believe that Jesus is who he says he is, okay? So God wants us to know that there's evidence, and we can believe the evidence. God presents the evidence, and there's nothing wrong with like, hey, what evidence do I have that Jesus is who he says he is? Because the Bible's filled with it. But a lot of times, growing up, we never have the opportunity of hearing that evidence. Let me stop there, see if anybody has any questions or comments. Yes. Great question, Michael. So Michael says, as we go through life, we're going to continue to be bombarded by contrary evidence. So in essence, what happens is we weigh the evidence. So you can, Michael, use an example of social media showing you thousands and thousands of airplane crashes, and it can undermine your faith in an airplane. But then we can also answer that challenge by statistically analyzing how many airplane flights there are, what's the possibility, how airplanes work. So you pile your evidence as opposed to contrary evidence. Like for me, I can say that I don't know every single thing about the Bible. And there's areas of the Bible that I have questions on, but I don't have to know every single thing about the Bible. I have to know enough to have the evidence that I need. So, for example, when I met with a Muslim the other day that I met with at Edgewater, and we were talking about who Jesus is, and he's telling me who Jesus is, and He hands me a Bible. I asked him if he's familiar with Isaiah 53. He wasn't familiar with Isaiah 53. So he's never heard of Isaiah 53. So he's not heard about the evidence that Jesus is the one who died on the cross for his sins. So it's my job to show him that evidence. So for example, Isaiah 53 was written 700 years before the birth of Christ, but it describes in detail how the Messiah is going to die for the sins of the world. So I can look at that evidence and I can show somebody, here's evidence that Jesus is who he said he is, because Jesus lived after Isaiah, 700 years after Isaiah. So here's evidence. So you have so even the person who's questioning still has to make that decision. What's the evidence? Okay, and it's learning to have that discussion. But that's a great question because that's exactly what happens. So, but let me just go forward here. So, what is a scientific method? A scientific method that is talked about in naturalism, where a lot of people in the scientific realm would put their confidence in, is you ask a question, you do your background research, you construct a hypothesis, okay? Then you test with an experiment. You analyze the results and you draw a conclusion. The hypothesis is true or the hypothesis is false. If the hypothesis is false, you go around that circle again. So in the same way, the Bible also tells us apologetics is important. So 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, okay? Yet do it with gentleness and respect." So here Peter's telling us that as believers, we should know why we believe what we believe, and we should have a reason. And the word reason is the Greek word for reason is logia, okay, which means logic. So you should have the logic behind what you believe. Peter's telling us that always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that's in you. That's, for example, I have a friend in Texas who was a Muslim, and we were talking, and he's a very successful guy, and he was telling me, he says, you know, Phil, I've kind of like crystallized it. I'm going to really learn Isaiah 53 as my go-to evidence for Muslims and for everybody who questions the Bible. I'm going to break down the logical points, and I'm going to use that evidence. And I go, well, there's more than that. And he goes, I know, but I'm going to focus on that. And so that's where the principle of Peter. It says, always have a logia, always have a reason to answer people for the hope that's within you. So even Paul, for example, in Acts chapter 26, verses 1 and 2, so Agrippa said to Paul, because Paul was going to be sent to Rome. Before he's sent to Rome, he goes before Agrippa. And so Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. Then Paul stretched out his hand and made his defense. And he says, I consider myself fortunate that I am before you, King Agrippa. I'm going to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews. And the word defense is apologia, okay? Paul's going to make a reason. So what does Paul do? Paul logically goes through the scriptures, proving that Jesus is the Mashiach, that Jesus is the Messiah as foretold in the Old Testament. And then even Agrippa goes, Paul, do you think you're going to make me a Christian today, this day? But what's Paul doing? Paul is presenting the evidence, okay? That's what you and I can do once we learn the evidence, okay? So and it's important to know that, and it's illogical, that everybody can't be right. So, like, for example, I always like Larry King. He would always bring these Christians on. Some of you are young, you might not remember Larry King, but he was like a talk show host on the radio, and he would always bring these Christians on, and then he would always ask them that question. Do you believe that non-Christians are going to hell? Because people are like, ooh, I don't want to say everybody who doesn't believe what I believe is going to hell, okay? But the point is that everybody can't be right. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and life. No man comes to the Father except through me. And Jesus says, if you don't believe in me, you're going to go to hell. And so that would get people. So, but you have to believe that people are right and people are wrong. You have to believe what is true, and that's hard thing sometimes for people to do. So the nature of truth in its very nature means that something is right and something is wrong, okay? And that belief does not make something true. So secular science teaches what is true. They claim to teach that God does not exist. And when I'm saying secular, it's basically naturalistic, non-theistic science will say that the universe came into existence out of nothing. And I love talking to atheists, because one of the things I have in my conversation with atheists is helping them understand that they are part of a faith-based system. So there's a guy named Krauss. He's out of Case Western Reserve, and he actually wrote a book, A Universe Out of Nothing, where he actually postulates that the universe came into existence and exploded into existence out of nothing. But before him, like Einstein and other scientists or secular scientists, they also believed there was a static universe, a universe that just existed in perpetuity from ages. Well, what was the cause of that universe? They couldn't answer you. But then along came the evidence, and the evidence pointed to a universe that had a starting point. And Einstein did not want to believe that the universe had a starting point, because Einstein, he's a smart guy, and he knew that if the universe had a starting point, guess what? It needed a cause. Everything that has a starting point needs a cause. So Einstein didn't want to get to that point. He didn't want to believe that the universe had a starting point, because if he believed the universe had a starting point, he had to ask the next question was, what was the cause of that universe? How did it come into existence? And so that is the religious aspect of atheism, because they believe that a universe came into existence out of nothing without an intelligent cause, and that life came into existence through random occurrences and random events. So that's a secular belief system, okay? And this is where it's important to understand. So again, it's truth is exclusive. What do I mean by truth is exclusive? That means truth means that it's true as opposed to being false. So just examining the Christian faith and secular science. So how did the universe begin? Well, secular science tells us, because it's based on the science, the universe had a starting point, therefore it had a big bang or singularity. So everything came from nothing, or the different theories they have. Where did life come from? Chemicals randomly formed by accident. What happens after life? Nothing. Our bodies decay. We go back to the earth. Whereas in the Christian faith, it's a creator caused the universe to come into existence. A creator caused life to form humanity in his image, and that heaven and hell is reality. So it's learning to understand that there's all these different options, and then everybody comes to a conclusion. And what we're going to look at the evidence of the Christian faith. But first, we're going to look at the evidence of the existence of God. And then, why is Christianity true and the Bible true as opposed to Judaism? Judaism rejects Jesus. Atheism rejects the existence of God. Islam believes in a different Jesus. Buddhism is actually a form of reformed Hinduism, because Siddhartha was a Hindu who came up with his own system called Buddhism, where he is the enlightened one. And these are just some of the examples. A majority of the religions on the earth right here, but they can't all be true. So how do you know which one's right? How do you know which one's wrong? Is there evidence? And this is what you and I have to examine. And so this is in the last page of your handout. So there's a process of examining it, okay? So God does not exist, okay? So if God does not exist, the corollaries of God does not exist. You have to believe, you have to have faith that everything came from nothing, that life formed by accident, and that matter always existed. That's the corollary of that. Whereas if you believe God does exist, that God is the cause of the universe, God created life, and matter had a beginning. So these are the two doors, okay, that we go into. Let me stop there and see if anybody has any questions or any comments. Well, the first way I'd answer that, I'd say, well, let's say you were the atheist, okay? I'd say, well, isn't that amazing? We both have a religion, and we both have faith, okay? So let's look at where the evidence of our faith goes. So first, as we know that the universe had a beginning, we know it had a start. So therefore, it requires a cause. So it had a beginning. So whereas God always existed, my claim is that God always existed, and he is the cause of the universe that brought it into existence. So God didn't have a cause. And so therefore, if you want to believe that the universe didn't have a cause, but it exploded, you can't believe the universe didn't have a cause because because evidence points that it was brought into existence at some point in time. But you have to then have all kinds of backup stories to kind of like, well, what was before the beginning? And again, that's all faith-based. So it's understanding that it's a faith-based system, okay? That you don't escape because you're an atheist. Doesn't mean you escape into science. No, you also have a faith-based system. I mean, the evidence behind the faith of Christianity blows everything away. I mean, that's why, that's why I do this class, because I love showing the evidence. I love giving people the evidence. Just giving you some examples, just real quick before we close, just kind of give you some examples, okay? So can someone predict the future? So can someone tell you what the future is, okay? So for example, this is one of the main evidences of the Bible, okay, is that everybody can look at the news yesterday, okay? We could look at the news, we could read the newspaper, we could read about it, and no one's like, if I tell you a story about something that was written 30 years ago, okay, great, okay? But Bible prophecy is different. Bible prophecy is for example, is God tells you the evidence about something before it happens. So for example, Isaiah 53, which I mentioned a couple of times. Isaiah is a prophet in the Old Testament. He lived 700 years before the birth of Christ, okay? And he talks about Jesus 700 years before Jesus comes. He talks about how he's going to be rejected, how he's going to be killed, how the people of Israel are going to reject him, how he's going to die for the sins of the world. In fact, recently Netflix released The Passion, or it's going to be playing the Passion. And there's an opening scene on the Passion, which quotes from Isaiah 53, verse 7, which is, he was pierced for our transgressions. And Netflix removed that opening line with that verse. And everybody was outraged, and they restored it. But the reason they removed it, because the movie, like basically saying, is Jesus is the fulfillment of the book of Isaiah. And so that's what's called Bible prophecy. And one of the ways that God proves the Bible is true is God proves the events, writes about the events before they take place. And the easiest way I can do it to illustrate that is if I said to you, I can tell you the future. And most of you would say, no, you can't, okay? And I say, well, what kind of evidence could I give you that I can tell you the future? I know what. I'll tell you. I'm going to give you the lottery number. It's $100 million next month. And I'm going to give you the 5 numbers that are going to be on the lottery. All right, go write them down. But that would be evidence, because then when the lottery hits, and then Rick's showing everybody his check for $100 million, and everybody's, wow, how did you do that? Well, can you do it again? And I'll believe it next time. Well, that's the kind of evidence the Bible uses. God uses Bible prophecy as a reason to believe. That God says, before it came about, I told you about it, that when it comes about, you might believe. And so what he's doing is he's going beyond. The easiest way I like to illustrate that is I can show you this object, and you can see the beginning and the end of this object at the same time, right? So if this object were time, and you and I were on this time continuum, okay, you're here, God sees the beginning of time and the end of time at the same time. And what Bible prophecy is God's telling us over here about the events that are going to happen over here. But we're over here. So when we see the events happening here, that's God showing you that his unique character, because God alone sees the beginning and the end at the same time. And God uses that as his objective evidence, which is objective. It's objective because it's outside of the natural realm. So, for example, Isaiah 44, verse 7 and 8 says, God says, who is like me? Let him proclaim it, let him declare it, and set it before me. Since I appointed an ancient people, let them declare what is to come and what will happen. Fear not, nor be afraid. Have I not told you from old and declare it to you? And are you not my witnesses? Is there not a God beside me? Is there a God beside me? There is no rock, I know not any. God himself declares that the events are going to take place. And one of the pieces of evidence that God uses is the nation of Israel. When God brought the nation of Israel from the land of Egypt into Israel, the prophet Moses said different things that are going to take place with the nation of Israel. And when they happened, they were fulfilling Bible prophecy. So, for example, God said, and I'm going to close with this. He says, if you're obedient, you're going to be the chief nation on the earth. But if you disobey me, I'm going to scatter you amongst the nations. But then later on in Deuteronomy chapter 32, he says, all these curses are going to come upon you, and I'm going to bring you back into the land, and you are going to know me, and I'm going to be your God, and I'm going to bless you. So the nation of Israel coming back into the land was actually fulfilling Bible prophecy written 3,400 years ago in the book of Deuteronomy. And we have much more evidence in this, but I just want to give you a quick example of how Bible prophecy works as evidence that you can trust the Bible.